The bullet shattered the window of the general store just as Eleanor Hartford was reaching for a bolt of calico fabric. And in that frozen moment between the crack of gunfire and the screaming that followed, she felt her heart stop, beating the way it had 3 years ago when another bullet had taken everything she loved. She dropped to the floor behind the counter, her hands shaking so violently that she had to clasp them together to keep from falling apart completely. The gunfire continued outside, men shouting, horses neighing in panic, and Eleanor pressed herself against the rough wooden boards, feeling the splinters catch at her cotton dress. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe, tried to remember that she was in Tombstone, Arizona territory in the spring of 1882, and not back in Kansas where her world had ended. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had started. Eleanor heard the heavy footsteps of men running, the jingle of spurs, the murmur of frightened voices. She stayed where she was, her heart hammering against her ribs, until she heard Mr. Peterson, the store owner, calling out that it was safe. "Just some drunk cowboys letting off steam," he said, his voice carrying through the store. "Marshall already got them sorted. Miss Hartford, you can come out now." Eleanor rose on unsteady legs, smoothing down her dress with trembling hands. She was 26 years old and had survived worse than stray bullets, but her body did not seem to remember that. Her body only remembered the day her husband Daniel had been shot down in the street during a bank robbery gone wrong, remembered the way his blood had pooled on the dusty ground, remembered the feeling of her world collapsing. She had come to Tombstone 6 months ago looking for a fresh start in a town that did not know her story, did not look at her with pity in their eyes. She had taken a job as a seamstress, renting a small room above the bakery, and had built herself a quiet life. A safe life. A life where she did not have to feel anything too deeply, did not have to risk her heart, did not have to remember what it felt like to love someone so completely that losing them nearly destroyed you. "You all right, Miss Hartford?" Mr. Peterson asked, peering at her with concern. He was a kindly man in his 50s with a graying beard and gentle eyes. "I am fine," Eleanor said, though her voice sounded thin even to her own ears. "Just startled is all. Course you were. Damn fools, pardon my language, you still want that calico?" Eleanor nodded, though she could barely remember why she had wanted it in the first place. She completed her purchase, tucking the fabric into her basket, and stepped out into the bright Arizona sunshine. The street was crowded with people, everyone talking about the excitement, and Eleanor kept her head down as she walked toward her room. She did not see the cowboy until she nearly walked straight into him. "Whoa there," he said, steadying her with gentle hands on her shoulders. "You all right, ma'am?" Eleanor looked up and found herself staring into the kindest pair of brown eyes she had ever seen. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly beneath his worn hat. He had a strong jaw shadowed with stubble and a face that looked like it smiled easily, though at the moment his expression was one of concern. "I am fine," Eleanor said, stepping back quickly. His hands fell away immediately and she clutched her basket tighter. "Excuse me." She tried to move past him, but he spoke again. "That shooting must have frightened you pretty bad. Saw you in Peterson's store when it started. Name is Jacob Cole, ma'am. I work at the Double R Ranch just outside town." Eleanor knew she should just nod politely and continue on her way, but something in his voice made her pause. It was warm and genuine, without the rough edges that so many men out here seem to have. She looked at him again, really looked, and saw that he was probably close to her own age, maybe 28 or 29, with laugh lines around his eyes and a patient way of standing, like he had all the time in the world. "Eleanor Hartford," she heard herself say. "And yes, it startled me. But I am unharmed. Glad to hear it." Jacob Cole tipped his hat to her. "You take care now, Miss Hartford." He moved past her then, his spurs jingling softly, and Eleanor continued to her room. But as she climbed the narrow stairs, she found herself thinking about those brown eyes, and that annoyed her. She had not let herself think about a man in years. She had learned her lesson about love, about the devastating pain that came when you gave your heart to someone and then had to watch them die. She would not make that mistake again. Over the following weeks, Eleanor found herself encountering Jacob Cole with surprising frequency. He seemed to be in town often, running errands for the ranch, picking up supplies, occasionally stopping by the saloon for a drink with the other ranch hands. And every time he saw Eleanor, he tipped his hat politely and asked after her welfare. "Miss Hartford, fine morning." "Miss Hartford, how are you today?" "Miss Hartford, hope business is treating you well." He never pushed, never tried to engage her in lengthy conversation, never made her feel uncomfortable. He was simply there, a steady presence, and Eleanor found that both comforting and deeply unsettling. She did not want to notice him. She did not want to feel the small flutter in her chest when she heard his voice. She did not want any of this. One afternoon in late May, Eleanor was sitting outside the bakery with her sewing, taking advantage of the good light when Jacob approached leading his horse. The animal was favoring its left front leg, and Jacob's face was creased with concern. "Afternoon, Miss Hartford," he said. "Sorry to disturb you. Ranger here picked up a stone and I am trying to get him to the stable. He is being stubborn about it." Eleanor set down her sewing. Despite herself, she had always loved horses. Back in Kansas, she and Daniel had owned 2 beautiful mares. "May I look?" Jacob seemed surprised but nodded. "Be obliged, ma'am." Eleanor approached the horse slowly, speaking softly. Ranger was a handsome bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a nervous disposition. She ran her hand along his neck, soothing him, then carefully lifted his hoof. The stone was wedged deep in the frog, but Eleanor had done this many times before. She pulled a small knife from her sewing basket and worked the stone free with practiced ease. "There," she said, lowering the hoof gently. "He should be fine now, but keep an eye on it. Make sure there is no bruising." Jacob was staring at her with open admiration. "Well, I will be. Where did you learn to do that?" Eleanor felt her walls going up immediately. "I used to have horses, a long time ago." Something in her tone must have warned him off because Jacob simply nodded. "Well, Ranger and I are much obliged to you, Miss Hartford. Thank you kindly." He led the horse away, and Eleanor returned to her sewing, but her hands were shaking again. She had not talked about her old life in months. She had not let herself remember the good parts, the parts that made the loss even more painful. Daniel teaching her to ride, the 2 of them racing across the Kansas plains, laughing until their sides hurt. The way he had looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. She set her sewing aside and went inside, suddenly unable to bear the bright sunshine and the memories it brought. That night, Eleanor could not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of Tombstone settling down for the night, and thought about Jacob Cole. He was nothing like Daniel. Daniel had been slender and fair, quick with words and quicker with laughter. Jacob was solid and dark-haired, quiet in a way that suggested depth rather than emptiness. And yet there was something about him that pulled at her, something that made her want to lower her guard and that terrified her. She had built her walls so carefully. After Daniel died, after the grief had nearly swallowed her whole, she had made herself a promise. Never again. Never again would she let herself be vulnerable like that. Never again would she hand her heart to someone, knowing it could be ripped away at any moment. The world was too dangerous, life too uncertain, and she had used up all her capacity for that kind of pain. But Jacob Cole, with his patient brown eyes and his gentle way of speaking, was making her question that promise, and she did not like it one bit. Summer arrived with blazing heat that turned the streets of Tombstone to dust and made everyone irritable. Eleanor spent her days in the relative cool of her room, sewing dresses for the ladies of the town and occasionally for the women who worked at the saloons. She did good work, and word had spread. She was making enough to live on, even saving a little, and that gave her a sense of security she desperately needed. Jacob continued to appear in town regularly, and Eleanor continued to see him. He never pushed for more than a polite greeting, but she began to notice small things. The way he helped Mrs. Chen carry her heavy baskets without being asked. The way he broke up a fight between two drunk miners with calm words rather than fists. The way he sat with old Mr. Weatherby outside the barbershop, listening patiently to the elderly man's rambling stories. Jacob Cole, Eleanor realized, was genuinely kind. And that made him dangerous because kindness was the one thing her carefully constructed defenses had no protection against. In mid-June, Eleanor was walking back from delivering a finished dress when she saw a crowd gathered outside the saloon. Her first instinct was to turn around to avoid whatever trouble was brewing, but then she heard a familiar voice and her heart lurched. "I do not want any trouble," Jacob was saying, his hands held up in a placating gesture. "Just came to get my friend home. He has had too much to drink." "Your friend owes me money," another man snarled. He was big and mean-looking, with a scar across his cheek and a gun on his hip. $20 for the poker game." "Joe does not have $20, Jacob said evenly, "but I will work out a payment plan with you. You have my word." "Your word." The scarred man spat on the ground. "I do not give a damn about your word, cowboy. I want my money or I want blood." Eleanor felt ice run through her veins. She knew how this went. She had seen it before. Men and their pride and their guns, and someone always ended up dead. She should walk away. She should let Jacob Cole handle his own business, but her feet were carrying her forward before her mind caught up. "Excuse me, gentlemen," she heard herself saying, her voice steadier than she felt. "I believe I can help settle this matter." Every eye turned to her. The scarred man looked annoyed. Jacob looked alarmed. "Miss Hartford," Jacob said quickly, "this does not concern you, please." "This man's friend owes $20, correct?" Eleanor interrupted, opening her reticule. Her hands were steady as she counted out the coins, though inside she was screaming at herself for getting involved. "Here, $20. The debt is paid." The scarred man looked at the money, then at Eleanor, then back at the money. He snatched it from her hand. "Fine. But your friend better stay out of my games from now on." He stalked back into the saloon. The crowd dispersed, disappointed that there would be no violence to gossip about. Jacob quickly helped his friend, a young cowboy who could barely stand, onto a horse, then turned to Eleanor. "Miss Hartford, I cannot accept." "It is done," Eleanor said curtly. "Your friend can pay me back when he is sober and able. Good day, Mr. Cole." She turned to leave, but Jacob caught up with her in 2 long strides. "Please wait." "That was incredibly foolish and incredibly brave, and I do not know whether to thank you or scold you." "You do not have the right to do either," Eleanor said, still walking. Her heart was racing and she felt dangerously close to tears. She did not know why she had done that. She did not want to care if Jacob got shot. She did not want to care about anything. "Eleanor, please." It was the first time he had used her given name, and it stopped her in her tracks. She turned to look at him, and the expression on his face made her chest ache. "Why did you do that?" He asked softly. "I do not know," Eleanor whispered. I should have walked away." "But you did not." "No, I did not." She drew a shaky breath. "Your friend will repay me, and then we are even for the horse, and we do not need to speak of this again." She walked away before he could respond, and this time he let her go. But as Eleanor climbed the stairs to her room, she felt the tears start to fall. She had broken her own rules. She had cared. She had intervened to protect someone, and that meant she had something to lose again, and she could not bear it. The next morning, Jacob appeared at her door. Eleanor heard the knock and considered not answering, but he knocked again, patient and persistent. "Miss Hartford, I know you are in there. I can hear you moving around. I just want to talk for a moment." Eleanor sighed and opened the door. Jacob stood there with his hat in his hands, his expression serious. "Come to scold me after all?" she asked, more sharply than she intended. "Come to thank you properly," he said, "and to pay back the $20. Your friend should be the one. Joe is still too hungover to ride into town, but I spoke to him this morning. He is ashamed and grateful, and he will work off his debt, but I wanted to bring this to you myself." Jacob held out a small burlap sack. "It is not money. Joe does not have it, and I already gave him a loan to cover his other debts, but I thought maybe you would accept this instead." Curious despite herself, Eleanor took the sack and opened it. Inside were perhaps 24 perfect silver buttons, the kind that cost a fortune at the general store. "They belonged to my mother," Jacob said quietly. "She was a seamstress too, back in Texas. When she passed 5 years ago, I kept these, thinking maybe someday I would have a wife who could use them. But I think my mother would like the idea of them going to another seamstress who is as talented as she was." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes again. "Mr. Cole, I cannot accept something with such sentimental value." "You can, and you will," Jacob said firmly. "You put yourself at risk for me yesterday, for a stranger. That deserves more than money, Miss Hartford. That deserves something that matters." Eleanor looked down at the buttons, their silver surfaces gleaming softly in the morning light. They were beautiful, clearly old and well-made, the kind of buttons that would grace a wedding dress or a fine Sunday coat. "Your mother would not want you to give these to a stranger," she said. "Maybe you will not always be a stranger," Jacob said. Then, before she could respond, he added, "I know you have your reasons for keeping people at a distance, Miss Hartford. I do not know what they are, but I can see the hurt in your eyes. I just want you to know that not everyone is looking to cause you pain. Some of us just want to know you." He settled his hat back on his head and tipped it to her. "Good day, Miss Hartford, and thank you again." He left, and Eleanor stood in her doorway holding the sack of buttons, feeling like something inside her was cracking open despite her best efforts to keep it sealed tight. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor found herself thinking about Jacob Cole far more than she wanted to. She used his mother's buttons on a dress for the banker's wife, and every stitch felt like a small surrender. She caught herself looking for him when she went into town and hated herself for the disappointment she felt on the days when he was not there. Jacob, for his part, seemed to have taken her words to heart. He was friendly when they encountered each other, but he did not seek her out, did not push for more than she was willing to give. And somehow, that patience made her want to give more. In early July, the town prepared for Independence Day celebrations. There would be a dance at the community hall, a picnic, games and contests. Eleanor had no intention of attending. She had avoided social gatherings since arriving in Tombstone, preferring the safety of solitude. But then Mrs. Chen, the Chinese laundress who had become something close to a friend, appeared at her door with a determined expression. "You are coming to the celebration," Mrs. Chen announced. "No arguments." "You have been in this town 6 months, Eleanor Hartford, and you have not made a single friend except for me. This is not healthy." "I do not need friends," Eleanor protested. "I am content as I am. You are not content, you are hiding." Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "I do not know what happened to you before you came here, but I know what running away looks like. I did it myself when I came to this country. But at some point, you have to stop running and start living again." Eleanor wanted to argue, but she found she had no words. Mrs. Chen was right, and they both knew it. "Just come for an hour," Mrs. Chen said. "If you hate it, you can leave, but give it a chance. Give yourself a chance." So Eleanor found herself on the 4th of July, wearing her best dress, walking toward the community hall with Mrs. Chen. The place was already crowded, filled with music and laughter and the smell of food cooking. Children ran between the adults, shrieking with excitement. Couples danced while others stood in groups, talking and drinking lemonade. Eleanor felt overwhelmed immediately. There was too much noise, too much joy, too much life. It reminded her of the gatherings back in Kansas, the barn dances where she and Daniel would dance until dawn. The memories threatened to drown her. "I cannot do this," she said, turning to leave, and walked straight into Jacob Cole. "Miss Hartford," he said, steadying her once again, "did not expect to see you here." "I was just leaving," Eleanor said, but Mrs. Chen had disappeared into the crowd, leaving her alone with Jacob. "Stay for one dance," Jacob said. "Please, I promise I will not step on your feet too badly." "I do not dance," Eleanor said automatically. "You do not dance or you will not dance," Jacob asked, and there was understanding in his eyes. "There is a difference." Eleanor felt something in her chest tighten. "Does it matter? It does to me." Jacob held out his hand. One dance, Eleanor. Just one. And if you want to leave after that, I will walk you home myself and make sure Mrs. Chen does not try to drag you back." Eleanor looked at his outstretched hand. She thought about her promise to herself, about the walls she had built, about the safety of her solitude. And then she thought about those silver buttons, and the way Jacob had helped his drunk friend and the kindness in his eyes. She put her hand in his. The music was a simple waltz, and Jacob was true to his word. He did not step on her feet, though Eleanor suspected he was skilled enough to make it look effortless while being careful with her. He held her at a respectful distance, one hand on her waist, the other clasping hers gently. "You are a good dancer," Jacob said after a moment. "My husband taught me," Eleanor said, and then froze. She had not meant to say that. She had not talked about Daniel to anyone in Tombstone. Jacob did not miss a step. "You are a widow." It was not a question, but Eleanor nodded anyway. 3 years now, I am sorry. Everyone is sorry." The words came out more bitter than she intended. Sorry does not bring him back. Sorry does not make it hurt less. "No," Jacob agreed. "It does not, but it is all we have to offer sometimes." They danced in silence for a moment. Then Jacob said, "My father was killed when I was 17. We had a small ranch in Texas and a group of Comancheros raided it. Killed my father, burned half our buildings. My mother never really recovered. She died 5 years later and everyone said it was pneumonia, but I think it was a broken heart." Eleanor looked up at him, seeing the old pain in his eyes. "I am sorry, see, it is all we have to offer." Jacob smiled faintly. "But I learned something from watching my mother fade away. I learned that grief can consume you if you let it. She let it. She stopped living the day my father died. She was just a ghost for 5 years, going through the motions. And when she finally passed, part of me was relieved because she was finally at peace. But another part of me was angry because she had 5 more years she could have lived, really lived, and she chose not to." Eleanor felt tears burning in her eyes. "It is not that simple." "I know," Jacob said softly. "Believe me, I know. But it is not betraying his memory to live, Eleanor. It is not betraying what you had to find a way to be happy again." The song ended and Eleanor pulled away from him, her heart hammering. "You do not understand." "Then help me understand." Eleanor shook her head. "I need some air." She pushed through the crowd and out into the warm evening, gulping down breaths. Jacob followed her, giving her space but staying close enough that she knew he was there. "His name was Daniel," Eleanor said finally, staring up at the stars. "We were married for 2 years. Happy years, the best years of my life. And then one day he went into town for supplies and he was in the bank when 3 men tried to rob it. They started shooting and Daniel was hit. He died in the street while I was at home making supper, not knowing anything was wrong." Her voice broke. "I did not even get to say goodbye. I did not get to tell him I loved him one more time. He was just gone and my whole world went with him. So I came here to a place where nobody knew me, where I could be invisible, where I would never have to feel that kind of pain again. And now I am complicating things," Jacob said. "Yes." Eleanor turned to look at him. "You are kind and patient, and you look at me like I am worth knowing, and I cannot do this, Jacob. I cannot let myself care about someone again. I cannot survive losing another person I love." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Can I tell you something?" Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. "After my mother died, I made myself a similar promise. I decided I would work the ranch, keep my head down, never let anyone too close. It seemed safer that way, and for 5 years I did exactly that. I was lonely, but I was safe." He paused. "And then I saw you in Peterson's store, dropping to the floor when that shooting started, and I saw the fear in your eyes. And later, when I met you properly, I saw the hurt too. And I thought, here is someone who understands, someone who knows what it is like to lose everything." He took a step closer. "I am not asking you to marry me, Eleanor. I am not asking you to promise me forever. I am just asking you to stop running long enough to see if maybe, just maybe, there is something here worth exploring. And if it turns out there is not, then we both go our separate ways and no harm done. But if you never give it a chance, you will spend the rest of your life wondering what if." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. "I am so afraid." "I know," Jacob said. "I am afraid too. But maybe we can be afraid together." He held out his hand again, and this time, Eleanor took it and held on tight. They did not rush into anything. Jacob understood that Eleanor needed time, needed to learn to trust again, and he proved to be the most patient man she had ever known. Over the following weeks, they began to spend time together. Slowly and carefully building something fragile and new, Jacob would come into town and invite Eleanor for walks. They would stroll through Tombstone, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to rope cattle from his father, about his mother's skill with a needle and thread. She told him about Kansas, about meeting Daniel at a church social, about the small house they had shared and her dreams of filling it with children. "We were going to have 4, she said one evening as they sat on the bench outside the bakery watching the sun set. 2 boys and 2 girls. Daniel had already picked out names. "What were they?" Jacob asked. Eleanor smiled, the memory bittersweet. "James and Henry for the boys. Rose and Catherine for the girls." "Those are good names," Jacob said. Then, carefully, "Do you still want children someday?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "I used to think that dream died with Daniel, but lately I have been wondering if maybe it just got postponed." Jacob looked at her, and there was such hope in his eyes that Eleanor felt her heart squeeze. She was falling for him, she realized. Despite all her promises, despite all her fear, she was falling for Jacob Cole. And the truly terrifying part was that it felt right. In August, the heat became nearly unbearable. The ranch where Jacob worked was struggling, cattle dying from lack of water, and Jacob spent long days riding the range, trying to find new water sources. He would come into town exhausted, dusty and sunburned, but he always made time to see Eleanor, even if it was just for a few minutes. One particularly brutal day, Eleanor insisted he come up to her room for water and to get out of the sun. Jacob hesitated, aware of propriety, but Eleanor pointed out that Mrs. Chen lived right downstairs and would hear everything, which made him laugh. Eleanor poured him water from her pitcher and watched as he drank it down gratefully. He looked thinner than he had a month ago, the work and the heat taking their toll. "You need to eat more," she said, unable to help herself. "Yes, ma'am," Jacob said with a tired smile. "I will get right on that as soon as I figure out how to add more hours to the day." "Jacob Cole, that is not funny. Little bit funny." He set down the empty cup. "But you are right, I am not taking good enough care of myself, been so focused on the cattle I forget sometimes." Eleanor made a decision. "Come here tomorrow evening, I will make you supper." Jacob's eyes widened. "Eleanor, I cannot ask you to. You are not asking, I am offering." She crossed her arms. "And do not even think about arguing with me. You need a good meal and I need the practice cooking for more than just myself." The next evening, Jacob appeared at her door freshly washed and shaved, his hair still damp, wearing his best shirt. Eleanor had prepared fried chicken, biscuits, and green beans, simple food but hearty, and the look on Jacob's face when he saw it made all the effort worthwhile. They ate together at her small table, and Eleanor realized this was the first time she had shared a meal with a man since Daniel died. The thought should have made her sad, but instead, she felt something like peace. This was different from what she had with Daniel, but it was good in its own way. "This is delicious," Jacob said, helping himself to a third biscuit. "Eleanor, you are an amazing cook." "My mother taught me," Eleanor said. "She always said the way to a man's heart was through his stomach." "Your mother was a wise woman," Jacob grinned. "Though I have to say, you already had my heart well before you fed me." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Jacob Cole, are you flirting with me?" "Yes, ma'am, I believe I am." His expression turned more serious. "Is that all right?" Eleanor thought about it, about the way her heart fluttered when he smiled at her, about how empty her days felt when she did not see him. "Yes," she said softly, "it is all right." After supper, they sat together on her small sofa, close but not quite touching. Jacob told her about a new foal that had been born at the ranch, how it had taken its first wobbly steps that morning. Eleanor told him about the dress she was making for the mayor's daughter, how the girl kept changing her mind about the design. At some point, Eleanor's hand found Jacob's and they sat in comfortable silence, fingers intertwined. When Jacob finally stood to leave, he looked down at their joined hands with such tenderness that Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you for this evening," he said. "It meant more to me than you know." "Thank you for being patient with me," Eleanor replied. "I know I am not easy." Jacob lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You are worth it, Eleanor Hartford. You are worth all the patience in the world." After he left, Eleanor lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her hand still tingling from his kiss. She was in love with him, completely, terrifyingly in love. And tomorrow, she decided she would tell him, but the next day, everything changed. Eleanor was in the general store when she heard the commotion outside. Men were shouting, horses were thundering past, and everyone rushed to the windows to see what was happening. Mr. Peterson stuck his head out the door, then turned back with a grave expression. "There has been an accident at the Double R Ranch," he announced. "One of the cowboys got thrown from his horse, broke his neck. They are bringing him into town now." Eleanor felt the world tilt. "Who?" she demanded, grabbing Mr. Peterson's arm. "Who was it?" "Do not know yet, Miss Hartford." Eleanor did not wait to hear the rest. She ran out into the street, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. A group of riders was approaching, and she could see they were carrying someone across a saddle. "Please," she prayed, "please, not Jacob, please." The riders drew closer, and Eleanor recognized the ranch foreman, Bill Sykes, leading the group. And there, riding beside him, dusty but whole, was Jacob. Eleanor's knees nearly gave out with relief. Jacob saw her and immediately dismounted, reaching her side in 3 long strides. "Eleanor, I am all right," he said quickly, gripping her shoulders. "It was Tommy Reed who fell. He is hurt bad, but I am fine." Eleanor stared at him, unable to speak. She had been so sure, so absolutely certain that it was Jacob who had been hurt, and the terror of that moment was still coursing through her veins. "Eleanor, breathe," Jacob said, his voice gentle but urgent. "You are scaring me. Breathe." Eleanor drew in a shaky breath, then another. "I thought it was you," she whispered. "I thought I had lost you." Jacob's expression shifted, something warm and fierce in his eyes. "You have not lost me. I am right here. But you could have been." Eleanor pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. "It could have been you on that horse. It could have been you with a broken neck. And I would have lost you before I ever told you." She stopped, unable to finish. "Told me what?" Jacob asked softly. Eleanor looked at him, at this kind, patient man who had spent months proving that love did not have to end in devastation, and she made a choice. "That I love you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, Jacob Cole, and it terrifies me, but I cannot keep pretending I do not. I cannot keep holding back, because if something happened to you and I had never told you, I would never forgive myself." For a moment, Jacob just stared at her. Then he closed the distance between them, cupped her face in his hands, and kissed her. It was not Eleanor's first kiss, but it felt like a beginning nonetheless. Jacob kissed her with a gentleness that made her want to cry, like she was something precious and fragile that he was afraid of breaking. And when he finally pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. "I love you too," he said. "Have loved you for months now, been waiting for you to be ready to hear it." Eleanor laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and tears. "You are the most patient man I have ever known." "Had a good reason to be patient," Jacob said, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Had the best reason." Behind them, someone cleared their throat loudly. They turned to see Bill Sykes watching them with an amused expression. "Much as I hate to interrupt," he said, "we need to get Tommy to the doctor." "Jacob, you coming?" "Go," Eleanor said. "Help your friend, I will be here when you get back." Jacob kissed her once more, quick and sweet, then swung back into his saddle. Eleanor watched as the riders headed toward the doctor's office, her heart still racing, but for an entirely different reason now. She had done it. She had opened her heart again, taken the risk, said the words out loud. and the world had not ended. In fact, standing there in the dusty street of Tombstone with the taste of Jacob's kiss still on her lips, Eleanor felt more alive than she had in 3 years. Tommy Reed survived his fall, though it took him months to recover. The doctors said it was a miracle he had not died on the spot. The whole town rallied around him and his young wife, Sarah, bringing food and helping with their small homestead while Tommy healed. Eleanor found herself drawn into the community in a way she had resisted before. With Jacob by her side, she attended church socials and town meetings, helped with fundraisers for Tommy's medical bills, and slowly began to make friends. Mrs. Chen gave her knowing looks but said nothing, clearly pleased that her advice had been taken to heart. Jacob courted Eleanor properly over the following months. He brought her wildflowers from the range, took her on picnics by the creek, and taught her to ride again on a gentle mare from the ranch. Eleanor, in turn, cooked for him, mended his clothes, and found herself imagining a future that included more than just survival. In October, as the brutal summer heat finally broke and the air turned cooler, Jacob took Eleanor on a ride out to a spot he called his favorite place in all of Arizona. It was a small canyon with red rock walls and a spring-fed pool, surrounded by cottonwood trees just beginning to turn gold. "This is beautiful," Eleanor breathed, taking in the scenery. "Wanted to bring you here for a while now," Jacob said, helping her down from the horse. "Wanted you to see it in the fall when the colors change." They sat by the pool and Jacob pulled out a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and apples. They ate in comfortable silence, watching the light play on the water. "Eleanor," Jacob said finally, setting aside his food. "I need to ask you something." Eleanor's heart began to race. She had known this was coming, had felt it building between them for weeks now, but she still felt a flutter of nerves. Jacob reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "This ring belonged to my mother. It is not fancy, just a simple gold band with a small diamond, but it meant the world to her. My father gave it to her when they married, and she wore it every day until she died." He opened the box, and Eleanor saw the ring, simple and beautiful just as he had described. "I know you have been hurt," Jacob continued. "I know you are afraid, but I also know that what we have is real and good, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that love does not always end in pain. Sometimes it just grows stronger." He took her hand. "Eleanor Hartford, will you marry me?" Eleanor looked at the ring, then at Jacob, and felt the last of her walls crumble. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Jacob, I will marry you." Jacob slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Eleanor let herself believe, finally, that maybe she could have this. Maybe she could have love and happiness and a future. They married in November, a small ceremony in the Tombstone church with Mrs. Chen and a few other friends as witnesses. Eleanor wore a dress she had made herself, pale blue with delicate lace trim and her mother-in-law's silver buttons down the front. Jacob wore his best suit, and when he saw Eleanor walking down the aisle toward him, his eyes filled with tears. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about weathering storms together and building a life on faith. Eleanor barely heard the words. She was too focused on Jacob, on the way he held her hands like they were something sacred, on the way he spoke his vows with such conviction. "I promise to love you all the days of my life," Jacob said. "To protect you, to provide for you, to be patient with you when things are hard. I promise to never make you regret taking this chance on us." When it was Eleanor's turn, she found her voice was steady. "I promise to trust you, to lean on you when I need support, to build a home and a life with you. I promise to be brave enough to keep loving you, even when fear tells me to run. And I promise to remind you every day how grateful I am that you waited for me to be ready." They sealed their vows with a kiss, and Eleanor felt something in her chest expand. This was different from her marriage to Daniel, but it was no less real, no less precious. She could honor what she had lost while still embracing what she had found. After the ceremony, there was a small celebration at the hotel. Eleanor danced with Jacob, and this time there were no tears, only laughter. She felt light, unburdened, like she had finally set down a weight she had been carrying for far too long. That night, as they lay together in their hotel room, Jacob held Eleanor close and said, "Thank you for taking a chance on me." "Thank you for being patient enough to wait," Eleanor replied, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I would have waited forever if that was what you needed," Jacob said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Eleanor smiled in the darkness. "Forever is a long time. Good thing we have it then." They moved into a small house on the edge of town that the ranch provided for Jacob as part of his wages. It was not much, just 3 rooms and a porch, but Eleanor loved it immediately. She hung curtains she had sewn, arranged her few pieces of furniture, and slowly turned the empty space into a home. Jacob proved to be an attentive husband. He noticed when Eleanor had bad days, when the grief would creep back in unexpectedly, and he never made her feel guilty for it. He would simply hold her, let her cry if she needed to, and remind her gently that he was not going anywhere. "It is all right to miss him," Jacob told her one night when Eleanor had been quiet through dinner. "Loving me does not mean you have to forget him." "I know," Eleanor said. "But sometimes I feel guilty, like I am betraying his memory by being happy with you." "You think Daniel would want you to be alone and miserable for the rest of your life?" Eleanor managed a small smile. "No, he would have told me I was being stubborn and foolish. Smart man." Jacob took her hand. "Honor his memory by living well, Eleanor, by being happy, by filling this house with the children you wanted. That is the best tribute you can give him." Eleanor nodded, grateful once again for Jacob's understanding. He never competed with Daniel's ghost, never made her choose between her past and her present. He simply accepted that both were part of who she was. Winter arrived, mild by Kansas standards but cold enough for Tombstone. Eleanor spent her days sewing and occasionally helping Mrs. Chen with laundry when business was busy. Jacob worked the ranch, coming home each evening tired but content. On Christmas Eve, they sat by the fire in their small parlor, and Jacob gave Eleanor a gift, a beautiful wooden sewing box he had made himself, with compartments for thread and needles and buttons. "Jacob, this is wonderful," Eleanor said, running her hands over the smooth wood. "Where did you learn to do this?" "My father taught me some carpentry when I was young, thought maybe I could put it to use making something for my wife." He grinned. "There is something inside." Eleanor opened the box and found a folded piece of paper. She opened it carefully and found a crude drawing of a house, much larger than their current one, with a barn and a corral. "What is this?" she asked. "It is a dream," Jacob said. "I have been saving my wages for years now, and I talked to Mr. Robinson at the bank. With another year or 2 of saving, I can buy us a small piece of land. Nothing fancy, just enough for a few head of cattle, some chickens, maybe a horse or 2. We can build this house, raise those children you want." He paused. "What do you think?" Eleanor felt tears well up. "I think it sounds perfect." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about how many rooms the house would have, where the barn should go, what they would name their first cow. It was exactly the kind of future Eleanor had stopped letting herself imagine, and now here it was, spread out before her like a gift. That night, as they lay in bed, Eleanor said, "I am glad I came to Tombstone." "I am glad you came to Tombstone too," Jacob replied. "Otherwise I might have spent the rest of my life alone, wondering if I would ever meet someone who understood." "You would have found someone," Eleanor said. "You are too good a man to stay alone." "Maybe, but I found you, and that is all that matters." Spring of 1883 brought changes. The ranch where Jacob worked hired several new hands, easing some of the burden on the existing cowboys. Tommy Reed recovered enough to return to light work, and Eleanor discovered, to her joy and terror, that she was pregnant. She told Jacob one evening in April, when the desert was blooming with wildflowers and the air was sweet. He had just come home from work, and she met him on the porch with the news. "You are certain?" he asked, his eyes wide. "As certain as I can be. I have not had my monthly courses in 2 months, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. Mrs. Chen thinks I am about 3 months along." Jacob let out a whoop of joy and picked Eleanor up, spinning her around despite her protests. "Jacob Cole, put me down. You will make me dizzy." He set her down but kept his arms around her. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Eleanor said, and then she started crying. "Are these happy tears or scared tears?" Jacob asked, wiping them away gently. "Both," Eleanor admitted. "I am so happy, Jacob, but I am terrified too. What if something goes wrong? What if I lose the baby? What if—" "SHH," Jacob said, pulling her close. "We cannot live our lives afraid of what might happen. All we can do is take care of you and the baby and have faith that everything will be all right." Eleanor nodded against his chest. He was right. She had spent 3 years paralyzed by fear, and it had nearly cost her this life, this love, this future. She would not let fear steal her joy again. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Eleanor continued to sew for as long as she could manage, though as her belly grew, she found it harder to sit for long periods. Mrs. Chen fussed over her, bringing her special teas and soups that were supposed to strengthen the baby. Jacob treated her like she was made of glass, which was annoying but also endearing. In the summer, Jacob took Eleanor to see the piece of land he wanted to buy. It was about 5 miles outside Tombstone, nestled in a small valley with a year-round creek running through it. The land was scrubby but fertile where the water reached, and Eleanor could picture exactly where the house would sit, where the barn would go, where her kitchen garden would flourish. "This is it," she said, taking Jacob's hand. "This is where we will raise our family. I will talk to Mr. Robinson next week," Jacob said. "With the money we have saved, we can make a down payment. We will have to keep working in town for a while, pay off the loan, but by the time the baby is a year old, we should be able to move out here." Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder, imagining their future spread out before them like the Arizona landscape. It was a good future, full of hard work and simple joys. It was more than she had ever hoped to have again. In November, on a cold night with the wind howling outside, Eleanor went into labor. Mrs. Chen and the town midwife, Mrs. O'Brien, attended her while Jacob paced the front room, wearing a path in the floorboards. Labor was long and difficult. Eleanor had never experienced such pain, and there were moments when she was certain she could not continue. But Mrs. Chen held her hand and told her she was strong, and Mrs. O'Brien coached her through each contraction, and Eleanor thought of Jacob waiting outside and found the strength to keep going. Just before dawn, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. "You have a son," Mrs. O'Brien announced, laying the squalling infant on Eleanor's chest. "And he has good, strong lungs." Eleanor looked down at her son, at his red face and tiny fists, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not thought possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you, Mrs. Chen slipped out to get Jacob, and he burst into the room moments later, his eyes wild with worry and hope. "Eleanor, are you?" "I am fine," Eleanor assured him. "Come meet your son." Jacob approached the bed like he was walking on holy ground. He looked down at the baby in Eleanor's arms, and tears began streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Jacob said, his voice choked. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Eleanor had thought about this moment for months. She looked at Jacob, this man who had given her back her life, who had loved her through her grief and fear, who had proven that patience could heal even the deepest wounds. "I want to name him James," she said. "After the son I dreamed of having with Daniel. I think Daniel would like knowing that dream did not die with him, that it just found a different way to come true." Jacob bent down and kissed her forehead. "James Cole, I like it." They spent the rest of that day in a haze of exhaustion and joy, learning how to care for their son, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. Mrs. Chen brought them food, and Mrs. O'Brien checked on Eleanor several times to make sure she was healing properly. That night, as Eleanor nursed James for what felt like the 100th time, Jacob sat beside them, his hand resting gently on the baby's head. "I am scared too, you know," Jacob said quietly. "Scared something will happen to him or to you, scared I will not be a good enough father. But then I look at you too and I remember what you told me once, That love is worth the risk. Eleanor looked at him, at this man who had taught her how to be brave again. It is, she said. You taught me that. We taught each other, Jacob said. Spring of 1884 brought the fulfillment of their dreams. Jacob finalized the purchase of the land, and they began building their house. It took months, with Jacob working alongside hired carpenters whenever he had free time. Eleanor would bring James out to the property, and the three of them would picnic by the creek while watching the house take shape. By summer, the house was complete. It was not large, just 4 rooms and a loft, but it was solid and well-built, with a wide porch and windows that let in the morning light. The barn came next, then the corral, then the chicken coop. They moved in on a blazing hot day in July. Jacob carried Eleanor over the threshold, then went back for James, who was toddling now and getting into everything. Eleanor stood in the center of her new parlor, holding her son, and felt a sense of completion she had never expected to feel again. "Welcome home," Jacob said, wrapping his arms around both of them. "Home," Eleanor repeated, and the word had never sounded sweeter. They built their life slowly and carefully. Jacob started their cattle operation with 6 head, gradually expanding as money allowed. Eleanor kept a vegetable garden that flourished in the desert soil when she watered it faithfully from the creek. They acquired chickens, then a few pigs, then a milk cow. It was hard work, but it was theirs. James grew into a curious, energetic boy with his father's brown eyes and his mother's dark hair. He followed Jacob everywhere, learning to feed the chickens before he could properly walk, learning to gentle the horses before he could ride them. Eleanor watched her husband and son together, and her heart was full. In the winter of 1885, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the fear was less overwhelming. She had done this before, survived it, brought forth life. She could do it again. She told Jacob on New Year's Day, and he responded with the same joy as before, though this time he managed not to spin her around. "Another baby," he said, his hand resting on her still flat belly. "James will have a sibling." "He will," Eleanor agreed. "I hope he is ready to share our attention." James, at 16 months old, was not particularly ready, but he adjusted. In August, Eleanor gave birth to their daughter, and they named her Catherine, after the dream Eleanor had carried from her first marriage. Catherine had Jacob's smile and a fierce temperament that reminded Eleanor of herself. The years flowed by like the creek on their property, steady and life-giving. They had good years and hard years, seasons of plenty and seasons of drought. They lost cattle to disease one year and had to rebuild their herd. Eleanor miscarried a 3rd pregnancy and grieved the loss, but James and Catherine kept her grounded, kept her moving forward. In 1888, she became pregnant again, and this time carried to term, giving birth to another son they named Henry. 3 children, Eleanor thought as she held her newborn. Not the 4 she had once imagined, but 3 was a perfect number, a family that filled their house with noise and love. Jacob proved to be an excellent father. He was patient with the children's questions, firm but fair with discipline, and generous with his affection. Eleanor would watch him teaching James how to rope a steer, or dancing Catherine around the kitchen, or singing Henry to sleep, and fall in love with him all over again. As their children grew, Eleanor realized that her past with Daniel had become less of a wound and more of a foundation. She no longer woke up thinking about what she had lost. Instead, she woke up grateful for what she had found. She told Jacob this one night as they sat on their porch watching the stars. "You were right," she said, "about patience healing wounds. You gave me time to grieve, time to heal, time to learn to trust again. And because of that, I got to have this life." Jacob took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her skin like he always did. "We got to have this life. You healed me too, Eleanor. You gave me a reason to stop hiding from the world." "We saved each other," Eleanor said. "We did," Jacob agreed. By 1890, their ranch was thriving. They had 40 head of cattle, a dozen horses, and a reputation for fair dealing that brought them steady business. James, at 7 years old, was already a competent horseman. Catherine, at 5, could outrun and outclimb most boys her age. Henry, at 2, was a quiet, thoughtful child who preferred animals to people. Eleanor had long since stopped taking sewing work, too busy with the ranch and the children to spare the time. But she still sewed for her family, making clothes and quilts, using the silver buttons Jacob had given her years ago on special occasions. Each time she sewed one onto a garment, she thought about Jacob's mother, about the legacy of love passed down through generations. One evening in late spring, as the children were playing in the yard and Eleanor was preparing supper, Jacob came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Do you remember the day we met?" he asked. Eleanor smiled. "You mean when I nearly walked into you on the street? That is the one. You were so determined to keep everyone at a distance, I thought I would never get you to talk to me." "And yet here we are," Eleanor said, leaning back against him. 8 years married, 3 children, a ranch we built together. How did you know I was worth the patience?" "I did not know," Jacob admitted. "I just hoped. And I figured even if you never loved me back, at least I would have tried. At least I would not spend my life wondering what if." Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. "I am so glad you tried. I am so glad you did not give up on me, even when I wanted to give up on myself." "I will never give up on you," Jacob said, and kissed her with a tenderness that still made her heart flutter after all these years. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Eleanor lay in bed thinking about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the girl she had been in Kansas, young and naive, thinking love was simple and safe. She thought about the woman she had become after Daniel died, broken and afraid, certain she would never feel whole again. And she thought about the woman she was now, loved and loving, building a life that honored both her past and her present. She had learned that healing was not about forgetting, but about integrating loss into the fabric of who you were. She had learned that opening your heart again after it had been shattered took tremendous courage, but the reward was worth the risk. She had learned that patience, real patience, was an act of profound love. Jacob stirred beside her, his arm tightening around her waist even in sleep, and Eleanor smiled in the darkness. Yes, she thought, patience heals all wounds, and love, the right kind of love, makes you brave enough to try again. The years continued to pass, each one adding depth and richness to their life together. The children grew strong and capable, learning the rhythms of ranch life. James developed his father's skill with horses and his mother's thoughtful nature. Catherine was fearless and opinionated, frequently getting into scrapes that required Eleanor's firm hand and Jacob's patient guidance. Henry remained quiet but observant, with a gift for understanding animals that Jacob said was rare and precious. In 1893, when Eleanor was 37 and Jacob was 39, they faced their first real crisis as a family. A particularly brutal winter struck Arizona, bringing snow and ice that killed half their cattle herd. Money became tight, and they had to make difficult decisions about which animals to keep and which to sell. Jacob took extra work breaking horses for neighboring ranches, and Eleanor returned to sewing to bring in additional income. It was a hard time, but they weathered it together. Eleanor found that adversity only strengthened what they had built. When things were difficult, Jacob did not retreat or grow angry. Instead, he became more present, more affectionate, more determined to protect what they had created together. And Eleanor discovered that she was no longer afraid of loss. She had been tested by grief before and survived it. She was stronger now, and so was her love. By spring, they had recovered enough to begin rebuilding their herd. James, now 10 years old, took on more responsibilities without being asked, waking before dawn to help his father with the feeding. Catherine, 8, helped her mother with the sewing, her small fingers learning to make neat stitches. Even Henry, at 5, contributed by gathering eggs and helping tend the vegetable garden. "We make a good team," Jacob said one evening as they surveyed their ranch, seeing the signs of recovery everywhere. "The best team," Eleanor agreed, taking his hand. That summer, they received unexpected news. A letter arrived from Kansas, forwarded through several addresses before finally reaching them. It was from Daniel's brother, whom Eleanor had not heard from since leaving Kansas years ago. He wrote that their mother had passed away and left Eleanor a small inheritance, enough money to make a real difference to the ranch. Eleanor sat on the porch steps, staring at the letter, feeling a complicated swirl of emotions. Grief for the woman who had been kind to her during her brief marriage to Daniel. Gratitude for the unexpected windfall. And a strange sense of closure, like Daniel himself was reaching across the years to give his blessing to the life she had built. Jacob sat beside her, reading over her shoulder. "What do you want to do with it?" he asked. Eleanor thought for a moment. "I want to use some of it to expand the ranch, buy more cattle, maybe another horse or two, and I want to set some aside for the children's future, for education or land of their own when they are grown." She paused. "And I want to use a portion to put up a proper stone for Daniel's grave. I have been sending money to the church in Kansas to maintain it, but I want something permanent, something that says he was loved and is remembered." Jacob pulled her close. "That sounds perfect." They used the inheritance wisely, and by the end of 1893 the ranch was more prosperous than it had ever been. They built an addition onto their house, giving each child their own small bedroom. They bought a piano for Catherine, who had shown an interest in music. They purchased books for Henry, who was learning to read and had an insatiable appetite for stories. Eleanor sometimes thought about the woman she had been when she first arrived in Tombstone, alone and afraid, determined never to love again. That woman felt like a stranger now. Eleanor had been transformed by Jacob's patience, by the life they had built, by the daily choice to be brave enough to keep loving despite the knowledge that everything could be lost. In 1895, when James turned 12, he expressed an interest in learning more about his mother's first husband. Eleanor had told the children that she had been married before, that their father was her second great love, but she had not shared many details. Now, James wanted to know. Eleanor and Jacob sat down with all three children one evening and told them the whole story. About Daniel and the bank robbery and the years of grief that followed. About Eleanor coming to Tombstone to escape her pain. About Jacob's patience and kindness and how slowly, carefully, they had built trust and love. "So Da is not our real father?" Catherine asked, her voice small. "I am your real father in every way that matters," Jacob said firmly. "I was there when you were born, taught you to walk, held you when you cried. Biology does not make a father, love does." "But we have another name," James asked. "Hartford instead of Cole." "Hartford was my first married name," Eleanor explained. "I kept it when your father and I married because it still felt like part of who I was. But you are Coles through and through. That is your father's name, and it is yours too." Henry, who had been listening quietly, said, "Do you still miss him?" "Your first husband?" Eleanor chose her words carefully. "Sometimes I do, not in a way that takes away from my love for your father, but in a way that honors what we had. He was a good man, and he loved me well. But he is gone, and your father is here, and I am grateful for both the love I had and the love I have now." The children seemed to accept this, and life continued. Eleanor was grateful they had asked, grateful for the chance to be honest about her past. She did not want her children to think that love was simple, or that you only got one chance at happiness. She wanted them to know that life was complicated and messy, and sometimes you had to be brave enough to try again. In 1897, Eleanor turned 41, and Jacob threw her a surprise birthday party. He invited Mrs. Chen, who was now elderly but still sharp as a tack, and several other friends from town. Tommy and Sarah Reed came with their 3 children. Bill Sykes, now retired from the ranch, came with his wife. The house was full of people and laughter, and Eleanor stood in the center of it all, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude. "I cannot believe you did this," she told Jacob, wiping away happy tears. "You deserve to be celebrated," Jacob said, pulling her into a dance as someone started playing the piano. "You have given me the best years of my life, Eleanor Cole. Let me give you one good party." They danced until Eleanor's feet hurt, and then they danced some more. The children ran wild with their friends, and the adults told stories and shared food, and it was perfect. Later, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Eleanor and Jacob sat on their porch swing watching the stars. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked. "Waiting so long for me to be ready, you could have found someone else, someone who was not so complicated." "Never," Jacob said without hesitation. "Not for a single moment. You were worth every second of waiting, every moment of patience." "And honestly, Eleanor, I do not think I could have loved anyone else the way I love you. We understand each other. We know what it is like to lose everything and have to build yourself back up. That is rare." Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Jacob Cole. More than I ever thought I could love anyone again." "I know," Jacob said, kissing the top of her head, "and I love you right back." The new century arrived with hope and promise. James, now 17, was courting a girl from a neighboring ranch, a smart, capable young woman named Mary who reminded Eleanor of herself at that age. Catherine, 15, was teaching piano to children in town and earning her own money. Henry, 12, spent most of his time in the barn with the animals and talked about becoming a veterinarian someday. Eleanor and Jacob watched their children growing into adults and felt a deep sense of pride. They had built something lasting, something good. Their children were kind and hardworking, ready to face the world with courage and compassion. In the spring of 1901, James and Mary married in a beautiful ceremony at their ranch. Eleanor cried through the entire service, watching her son make the same promises she and Jacob had made 18 years earlier. After the ceremony, as they celebrated with friends and family, Jacob pulled Eleanor aside. "Our baby is married," he said, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "He is not a baby anymore," Eleanor said. "He is a man making his own life." "He learned from good examples," Jacob said. "He knows what a strong marriage looks like. He knows how to be patient and kind. You taught him that." "We taught him that," Eleanor corrected. They watched as James and Mary danced, looking at each other with such joy and love that it made Eleanor's heart ache in the best way. This was the legacy they were leaving, she realized. Not just the ranch or the land, but the understanding that love was worth fighting for, that patience could heal wounds, that bravery sometimes meant opening your heart even when you were afraid. Over the next few years, their family continued to grow and change. James and Mary built a house on the section of land Jacob deeded to them, starting their own cattle operation with help from Jacob. Catherine surprised everyone by falling in love with a widowed schoolteacher from Tucson, a kind man named Robert who had 2 young daughters. Eleanor saw echoes of her own story in their courtship, the way Catherine carefully won over a man who had loved and lost and was afraid to try again. Henry, true to his word, left for veterinary school in California when he turned 18. Eleanor cried for days after he left, missing her youngest desperately, but she was also proud of him for pursuing his dreams. In 1905, Eleanor became a grandmother for the first time when James and Mary welcomed a son they named Jacob. Eleanor held her grandson and felt the circle complete itself. Life continuing, love multiplying, the wounds of the past fully healed and transformed into blessings. "He has your eyes," Eleanor told Jacob, who was hovering over her shoulder, desperate to hold his namesake. "He has your nose," Jacob countered. "He is perfect." They spent hours with baby Jacob, marveling at his tiny features, arguing good-naturedly about who he looked like. Eleanor thought about how she had once believed she would never have grandchildren, never have this extension of family. She had been so certain her story was over. And yet here she was, holding proof that her story had just been paused, waiting for her to be brave enough to start the next chapter. Catherine married Robert in 1906, and suddenly Eleanor had 2 stepdaughters to dote on. The girls, ages 6 and 8, were shy at first but quickly warmed to Eleanor's gentle nature. She taught them to sew and cook, passed down the recipes her own mother had taught her, and felt the satisfaction of knowing these traditions would continue. Henry returned from California in 1908 with his veterinary degree and a quiet young woman named Alice who worked as a nurse. They married that same year, settling in Tombstone, where Henry opened a practice. Alice and Eleanor became close, and Eleanor was grateful her youngest had found someone who understood his gentle nature. As the years passed, Eleanor and Jacob settled into the comfortable rhythms of older age. Jacob's hair went silver, and the hard years of ranch work caught up with him, leaving him with an aching back and stiff joints. Eleanor developed spectacles for reading and found that her hands cramped after too much sewing. But they were healthy and happy, surrounded by children and grandchildren, living the life they had built together. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1908, their entire family gathered for a celebration. The house was packed with people, 3 generations of love and laughter. Eleanor looked around at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at Jacob telling stories to the little ones, at the food covering every surface, at the joy radiating from every corner. "You did good, Eleanor," Mrs. Chen said, appearing at her elbow. The old woman was well into her 80s now, but still sharp. "You took a chance on that cowboy and look what came of it. You were right," Eleanor said, hugging her friend, "about everything, about not hiding, about giving myself a chance. Thank you for pushing me." "That is what friends do," Mrs. Chen said. "Now go dance with your husband before he spends the entire party entertaining children." Eleanor made her way to Jacob, and he immediately pulled her into a dance, the two of them moving together with the ease of decades of practice. 25 years, Jacob said. "Can you believe it?" "Barely," Eleanor admitted. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I was afraid to love you, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together." "Both things can be true," Jacob said. "That is the beauty of a long marriage." All the years layered on top of each other, all the versions of ourselves loving all the versions of each other. Eleanor looked up at him, at the face she knew better than her own, at the eyes that still looked at her with tenderness and desire. "I am so glad you were patient with me." "I am so glad you were brave enough to try again," Jacob replied. They continued dancing, surrounded by their family, blessed beyond measure. Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here, from Kansas to Tombstone, from grief to hope, from fear to love. It had not been an easy road, but it had been worth every difficult step. In 1912, Eleanor turned 56, and she and Jacob began to think about slowing down. James had taken over most of the ranch operations, running it with the same care and dedication his father had. Catherine and her family visited frequently, filling the house with music and laughter. Henry's veterinary practice was thriving, and he and Alice had given Eleanor 2 more grandchildren to spoil. Eleanor spent her days tending her garden, sewing quilts for her grandchildren, and sitting on the porch with Jacob, watching the sunsets paint the Arizona sky in brilliant colors. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable with silence and with words. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if Daniel had not died?" Jacob asked one evening. Eleanor considered the question carefully. "Sometimes. I think we would have been happy. We would have had our children, built our life in Kansas. It would have been good." She paused. "But I cannot regret what happened because it brought me here to you, to this life, and I would not trade this for anything." "Not even to have him back?" Jacob asked, and there was no jealousy in the question, just honest curiosity. "Not even that," Eleanor said. "Because that would mean losing you, losing our children, losing everything we built. I loved Daniel with my whole heart, and I grieved him deeply. But you taught me that the heart has infinite capacity, that loving again does not diminish what came before. I can honor both loves, be grateful for both lives." Jacob took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I feel the same about my parents. Missing them does not take away from my joy in what I have. It just reminds me to be grateful for every day." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the stars began to appear. Eleanor felt at peace in a way she had never imagined possible during those dark years after Daniel's death. She had learned that healing was not linear, that it required patience and courage and the willingness to keep trying even when it felt impossible. And she had learned that sometimes, the greatest love stories were not the ones that came easy, but the ones that required you to fight through fear and grief to claim the happiness on the other side. In 1915, Eleanor and Jacob celebrated their 32nd anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the two of them. Their children had offered to host a party, but Eleanor and Jacob had declined, preferring the intimacy of each other's company. "Do you remember what you said to me the day you proposed?" Eleanor asked over dessert. "I said a lot of things that day," Jacob replied with a smile. "Which part specifically? You said that sometimes love just grows stronger instead of ending in pain. You were right about that. What we have has only deepened over the years." Jacob reached across the table and took her hand. "You made me right. You chose to believe it, chose to build this with me. I could not have done any of this without you." "We did it together," Eleanor said. "That is the point. We were both broken when we met, both afraid. But we gave each other time to heal, and we built something beautiful from our scars." That night, as they lay in bed, Eleanor thought about all the young women out there who were going through what she had gone through, who had lost loves and believed they would never feel whole again. She wished she could tell them all that there was hope, that healing was possible, that patient love could work miracles, but she could not tell them. All she could do was live her life as a testament to that truth and hope that somehow her story might reach someone who needed to hear it. The years continued their steady march forward. Eleanor and Jacob grew older together, their bodies slowing but their love constant. They celebrated the births of more grandchildren, attended weddings and baptisms, weathered losses and celebrated triumphs. In 1920, Eleanor turned 64 and Jacob was 66. They were both in good health for their age, still able to work the garden and take short rides. They had stepped back from most ranch operations, letting James and his sons handle the heavy work, but they were still active and engaged. One afternoon in late spring, Eleanor and Jacob saddled up their horses and rode out to the spot where Jacob had proposed all those years ago. The canyon looked much the same, the red rocks eternal, the spring-fed pool still clear and cool. They dismounted and sat by the water, just as they had decades before. "I come here sometimes," Jacob admitted, "when I need to think or remember. This place is special to me." "Because this is where I finally said yes," Eleanor guessed. "Because this is where our real life together began," Jacob corrected. "Everything before that was just prologue. This is where the story truly started." Eleanor leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "It has been a good story. The best," Jacob agreed. "And it is not over yet. We still have more chapters to write." They sat there until the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and amber. Then they rode home together, moving at an easy pace, talking about their plans for the garden and speculating about which grandchild might visit next. That night, Eleanor wrote in her journal, something she had done sporadically over the years. She wrote about the journey from grief to joy, about the cowboy who had been patient enough to wait for her broken heart to heal, about the life they had built from the ashes of loss. She wrote, "If I could speak to the woman I was when I first arrived in Tombstone, I would tell her this. The pain you feel right now is real and valid. The fear that you will never be whole again is understandable, but there is hope on the other side of this grief. There is love waiting for you if you can just be brave enough to try again. And yes, loving again means risking more pain, but it also means joy and laughter and a full life. It means children and grandchildren and a partner who knows your scars and loves you anyway. It means waking up grateful instead of grieving, so be patient with yourself. Take the time you need to heal, but do not close yourself off forever. Do not let fear win, because somewhere out there someone is waiting to show you that patience heals all wounds and that love is always worth the risk." Eleanor closed the journal and set it aside, then climbed into bed next to Jacob, who immediately curled around her like he always did. This, she thought, was what contentment felt like. Not the absence of pain or struggle, but the presence of deep, abiding love that had weathered every storm. The following years were gentle ones. Eleanor and Jacob settled into a quiet routine, spending their days with simple pleasures. They tended their garden together, read books aloud to each other in the evenings, and received a steady stream of visitors. Their grandchildren adored them, and Eleanor and Jacob delighted in spoiling the little ones. In 1925, they celebrated their 42nd anniversary. All three of their children came home for the occasion, bringing spouses and children and grandchildren. The house overflowed with people, and Eleanor stood in the center of the chaos, feeling her heart might burst with happiness. "Look at what we made," Jacob said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist just as he had done 1,000 times before. "Look at what we made," Eleanor echoed, surveying the room full of family, all of it stemming from her choice to be brave, from Jacob's choice to be patient. They held the party outside under the stars, with tables groaning under the weight of food and children running wild with excitement. James gave a speech about his parents' love being the foundation for everything good in his life. Catherine played the piano and led everyone in singing. Henry presented them with a leather-bound book he had made, filled with messages and drawings from all the grandchildren. Eleanor cried reading through the book, seeing how much she and Jacob were loved, seeing the legacy they had created. They had not just built a ranch or a family. They had built a testament to the power of patient love, to the possibility of healing, to the courage it took to try again. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Eleanor and Jacob sat on their porch swing, wrapped in blankets against the cool night air. "If you could do it all over again, would you change anything?" Eleanor asked. Jacob thought about it. "I would not change a single thing. Every moment, good and bad, brought us here, and here is exactly where I want to be. Even the hard parts, the waiting, the grief, the fear, especially those parts," Jacob said, "because they taught us what we needed to know. They made us patient and compassionate. They helped us appreciate what we have." Eleanor nodded, understanding. The hard parts had been necessary. The waiting had been necessary. It had all been part of the journey that brought them to this moment, to this life overflowing with love and family. "I am glad you found me," Eleanor said. "I am glad you let yourself be found," Jacob replied. They sat there until dawn, watching the stars fade and the sun rise over their land, grateful for every moment they had been given, grateful for the patience and courage that had healed their wounds and brought them home to each other. In 1928, Eleanor turned 72 and Jacob was 74. They were both slowing down now, their bodies reminding them daily that they were not young anymore. But their love remained constant, perhaps even deeper for all the years it had been tested and proven true. One morning in early summer, Eleanor woke to find Jacob watching her with a tender expression. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice still rough with sleep. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Jacob said. "How close I came to missing all of this because I was afraid. If I had not been brave enough to approach you that first day, if I had not been patient enough to wait for you to be ready, I would have missed the best part of my life." Eleanor reached up and cupped his weathered face in her hand. "And I am thinking about how grateful I am that you did not give up on me, that you saw something worth waiting for, even when I could not see it myself. I saw a woman who was strong enough to survive devastating loss," Jacob said. "I saw someone who was protecting her heart because it was precious, not because it was dead. I saw you, Eleanor, even when you were trying to hide." They lay there together as the sun rose. Two people who had found each other in the aftermath of grief and built something beautiful from their shared understanding of pain and healing. Later that day, surrounded by family for a Sunday dinner, Eleanor looked around the table and felt a profound sense of completion. This was what she had fought for when she had chosen to love Jacob, when she had chosen to be brave despite her fear. This abundance of love, this legacy of healing, this proof that wounds could be transformed into wisdom. Her grandchildren were growing up strong and kind. learning the same lessons about love and patience that Eleanor and Jacob had learned. Her children had built solid marriages of their own, carrying forward the example of commitment and grace they had witnessed in their parents. And Eleanor, who had once believed she would never smile again, who had been so certain that her story ended in a dusty Kansas street with Daniel's death, had lived to see that she had been wrong. Her story had not ended. It had simply taken a turn she could not have anticipated, leading her to a love that was different but no less real, a happiness that honored her past while embracing her future. As the years continued to pass, Eleanor and Jacob faced the inevitable challenges of aging. There were health scares and hospital stays, moments when they feared losing each other. But they faced everything together, their hands clasped tight, their love the constant that carried them through. In 1932, on a warm autumn day, Jacob fell ill with pneumonia. Eleanor stayed by his bedside day and night, just as he had stayed by hers through every difficult moment of their life together. Their children gathered, worried and grieving in advance, but Eleanor refused to give up hope. "You do not get to leave me yet, Jacob Cole," she told him, holding his hand as he struggled to breathe. "We have more time together. I am not ready to let you go." Jacob fought hard, and slowly, miraculously, he began to improve. The doctor called it remarkable for a man of his age, but Eleanor knew it was more than that. It was love, pure and simple, giving him the strength to keep fighting. When Jacob was finally well enough to come home, Eleanor helped him out to their porch swing, settling beside him with a blanket tucked around them both. "You scared me," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I scared myself," Jacob said, his voice still weak. "But I am not going anywhere, Eleanor, not yet, we still have time." And they did. They had 3 more precious years together, years they spent making every moment count. They told each other stories they had told 100 times before, reliving their memories. They held their great-grandchildren and marveled at the continuation of their legacy. They sat on their porch and watched sunsets, grateful for every single one. In the spring of 1935, Jacob passed away peacefully in his sleep, Eleanor beside him just as she had been for nearly half a century. He was 79 years old, and he died knowing he was deeply loved, surrounded by family, having lived a full and beautiful life. Eleanor grieved him deeply, but it was a different grief than she had felt for Daniel. This grief was laced with gratitude for all the years they had shared, all the memories they had made. She missed Jacob terribly, felt his absence like a missing limb, but she did not regret a single moment of their life together. She did not regret being brave enough to love again. At Jacob's funeral, Eleanor stood surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and she spoke about the man who had taught her that patience heals all wounds. "He waited for me," she said, her voice strong despite her tears. "When I was too afraid to love, too hurt to try again, he waited. He showed me through his actions that not all love ends in devastation, that sometimes it just grows deeper and richer with time. He gave me back my life, and in doing so, he gave all of you your lives too. Every person standing here is a testament to the power of patient love, to the miracle of second chances." Eleanor lived for 10 more years after Jacob's death, surrounded by family, supported by love. She never remarried, but she was not lonely. She had her children and grandchildren, her garden and her sewing, her memories and her gratitude. She spoke often about Jacob, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations. She told them stories about his kindness and patience, about the way he had courted her slowly and carefully, about the life they had built together from the ashes of their separate griefs. And she told them the most important lesson she had learned, that being hurt in love does not mean you should never love again. It means you should be careful and wise, patient with yourself and others, brave enough to take the risk despite the possibility of pain. Because love, real love, is always worth it. In the autumn of 1945, Eleanor passed away quietly in her sleep, just as Jacob had. She was 89 years old, and she died peacefully, surrounded by the quilts she had made, the photographs of everyone she loved covering every surface. Her children found her journal, the one she had kept sporadically over the years, and they read her final entry written just days before her death. I have lived 2 great love stories in my life. The first taught me what love was, showed me its beauty and power. The second taught me what love could be, showed me its healing and resilience. I am grateful for both. I am grateful for Daniel, who loved me with all the passion and joy of youth, and I am grateful for Jacob, who loved me with all the patience and wisdom of experience. Together they gave me a full and beautiful life, and I regret nothing. To anyone reading this who is afraid to love again after being hurt, I say this: be afraid. Fear is natural and protective, but do not let it be the end of your story. Wait for someone who is patient enough to earn your trust, brave enough to love your scars, wise enough to know that healing takes time, and when you find that person, take the leap. Let yourself fall, because the joy on the other side of fear is worth every moment of courage it takes to get there. Patience heals all wounds, but love is what makes the healing worthwhile. Eleanor was buried next to Jacob on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under an Arizona sky that went on forever. Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, and they told stories about her strength and resilience, her wisdom and grace. They talked about how she had transformed grief into growth, how she had chosen courage over fear, how she had built a legacy of love that would continue for generations. They talked about the cowboy who had been patient enough to wait for her, and the woman who had been brave enough to try again. And as the sun set over the red rocks and desert scrub, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, they felt her presence there with them, together again with Jacob, at peace at last. The ranch continued, passed down through the family, a living monument to Eleanor and Jacob's love. Their great-great-grandchildren would play in the house they built, swim in the creek where Jacob had proposed, and learn the stories of their ancestors who had proven that patient love could heal even the deepest wounds. And somewhere, perhaps, Eleanor and Jacob were together again, young and whole, dancing under desert stars, their journey complete, their love eternal, their legacy secure. They had taken broken pieces and made something beautiful. They had turned fear into faith and grief into grace. They had proven that second chances were possible, that love could bloom in the aftermath of loss, that patience could heal all wounds. And in doing so, they had given hope to everyone who came after them, everyone who had ever been afraid to love again, everyone who needed to believe that healing was possible and happiness could return. Their story became a beacon, lighting the way for all those who followed, proving that even in the wild, uncertain world, patient love could work miracles.